Good morning. Thank you, Leandro. Thank you to La Salle to invite me today to share with you basically some thoughts and reflections on not only on Barcelona, but on cities in general. I have divided this presentation in more or less 3 areas. The first one will give a certain overall look of what Leandro was just mentioning about livable cities, challenges, I would say at a worldwide perspective. Then I will go to explain what exactly does it mean to be the chief architect of a city like Barcelona. And then I will share with you, I choose one of the projects, okay? We have many things on the table, as you can imagine, but I thought that you might be interested on public spaces, since probably the livability of a city has, well, the main challenge probably is on public spaces, since in many cities around the world, public spaces is leftover spaces between architectures, and it's not really the main objective or matter of public policy. And in this city for many years already, since the democracy, for the different governments in the city council, the proactive policies on public spaces has become one of the key policies to make sure and to improve the conditions of our city. So if I might start, we are very familiar about these statistics from the World Bank, from UN, different agencies and so on. But basically, we are dealing with a world that it's becoming more and more urban. And Leandro was saying, what's the definition of cities? We take it for granted. I can tell you that I had myself my experience in a report for UN Habitat some years ago that I used the word city, and I got more than 50 comments just trying to point at specific things on what exactly is a city, it's not, and so on. But we might agree that probably the world in general is becoming urban, and we will talk about what exactly do we mean by urban. And of course, I appointed what I think are the 2 main challenges, and underneath them, of course, we can get into much more detail. But basically, the effects of climate change, because climate change is literally changing the conditions for our living in this planet. And this is probably the biggest challenge, because all our way of doing things has to be rethought to, in a way, to make us or to adapt us to these new conditions. So that literally, if we had a trend, we are facing now how we shift to adapt ourselves to climate change, while at the same time, of course, we reduce those actions that has a direct impact on this climate change causes. And in our case, in our conditions here in the Mediterranean, basically we are facing water scarcity, and that's relevant to put because I have a lot of discussions on green in public spaces. And I always say it in any meeting, don't get wrong, don't get mistake. We will get green if we manage water. If we don't have water, we won't have green, and it's not the other way around. So the city has the challenge to manage water to guarantee that green. And of course, green helps to keep that water. So that is this kind of circle. Also, of course, rising temperatures. Leandro was saying that we are now, well, in the summer, and you can perceive high temperatures, but you're lucky. In fact, this week, it's not as bad as some weeks ago that it would really be really tough to sleep at night. So raising temperatures is also one of the main challenges we're facing, and inequalities. Inequalities in urban areas, that it's spreading all over, but the most worrying thing is that it's becoming chronic in many places around the world. One is when we're saying that our global population is becoming urban. 1 in 4 people will end up living in slums. Slums does not have any of the urban conditions that we might consider to call it city, not even urban probably, because it never has been really urbanized. And by urbanized, we understand a lot of things, at least in our country, for legal reasons. This means water, potable, drinking water, sewage system, roads, streets, energy. So I think that we have to focus that when we say urban, we are talking about the reality that 1 in 4 people, which is quite a lot, in fact, will be sleeping in conditions that are slums. But this is not happening only in the so-called developing world, but also in our so comfortable developed world, where we are facing inequalities. We can see them on the street, we can see hidden in parks, we can see hidden in in spaces that are not necessarily directly into our eyes, but it's hidden in our cities. And this is something that we have to face also. And I want to share some of my concerns that when we talk about slums or inequalities, many times the reactions globally when we're talking about housing shortage is to respond with these kind of approaches. This is not a city. This is just the response in terms of quantity of housing units. That has nothing to do with a city. And we have to raise and say that loud, because these examples are from the 5 continents around the world. And this is not the solution. We are just providing housing. Millions of these kind of responses are being abandoned all over the world because there are no economic opportunities in a place like that. And we have to remember, housing is a problem, but the reason why we went at the first time to a city is to get opportunities of work. Not for housing, not for residential. Residential is part of the needs, of the basic, needs we have. But we go to cities for job opportunities. And when we respond to housing shortages with this kind of response, we are not responding to the first basic meaning of a city, that is job opportunity. When we come together in an area that we can exchange and the conditions allow us to develop these activities, is when a city can be livable. This is not a city, this is not livable. Also, and I'm sorry, this is not the response. When I read in any place about eco barrios, eco neighborhoods, I used to wear my hair up, but it gets even more, because we think that then the response is we do the same, but we paint in green. Now, wow, we are super sustainable and this is livable. And no, that's not the response. Again, what's that? That is just a residential area in green. That's right. Now it's green, but it doesn't have the intensity, the mixture, the compactness that the real livable experience in urban context requires to become real. And this is something that we have to say, because to be honest, in my position right now, I'm quite concerned. Yesterday, I was in a meeting and they were showing a new area of the city that will be under development in the next 10 years, and all the architectures were painting green in top of it, even above roofs, concrete roofs, that we know how difficult it is to plant real trees on top of roofs, and expensive. And we're talking about sustainability. And I'm sitting in that meeting and I'm saying like, wow, I mean, it's great green, and I agree with that. But should we also understand that there are places for certain things and places for other things, and that we have to make sure that there is a balance between what can be real and what we put on paper, because we know paper, we can paint all the green that we want. And why I'm saying that? Because I like very much this Canadian institute that it's working, putting prices to the thing, costs to the things. Because we talk about housing shortages. If anyone in this room thinks that we can solve affordable housing in suburban context, has to look at these figures, because there is no way to do that. And not because of there are many facilities here, the cost of many of the services related to an area per household, but the last four, the price of streets maintenance, not only when you do that, when you build them, but when you maintain that. When we talk about basic infrastructures, water, sewage, just make the numbers. There's no way we can create affordable housing if we not go for compact, intense urban fabrics. It's not affordable. Maybe in rich countries, but Spain is not a rich country. It's a middle income country in Europe, and we have to be aware about that. And why I'm saying that? Because I'm an advocator. I'm advocating always for compact and dense cities as the real starting point for any livable city. And I love to put that picture because coming from a Mediterranean city, this is Pompeia, 7th century before Christus. We knew that already. And when we talk about streets, this is a street in Pompeia and this is a street in Barcelona. Many times to my students, I say, when you see that, maybe we haven't invented anything at all. We are just using the experience for centuries and centuries. And in many ways, we have forgotten some of these basic things. What I love about working before I arrived to that position, I had the great opportunity to work with different UN agencies over 10 years, was the gift they gave to me to be able to think on the basics, what's back to basics in places, because many times in my city, the discussions are too sophisticated. We think that we are at the center of the world, that our solutions will be the solution of the climate change. And it's relevant, and it's important to put yourself in a certain global perspective and realize that we also have to go back to basics. What's really relevant? What really makes a difference? Because the rest, it's a waste of time, waste of energy, and therefore it's unsustainable. So with all these reflections in mind, I will start entering on the second part of the presentation. I did the research as Leandro, looking at the rankings on livable city. And to be honest, I enjoyed it very much yesterday. First of all, because these are the 5 first cities. In this ranking, Barcelona is in the 38th position. Then I look to other kind of rankings, and I look at if Barcelona was in other rankings in the first 5 positions. We are the 8th on the best city in the world. Who knows what by best city they mean? And the 3rd in the best city in Europe, whatever means best city. But I like very much because this ranking of livable cities based on stability, and it has to do with political context, healthcare, and it has to do with services of health and hospitals and these kind of things, culture, education, and the 5th one with a 20% of value in the indicator. It's about infrastructure. Most of the infrastructure, of course, is based on public transportation, green space, and I'm not sure it was affordable housing part of that. But I want to show with you this list and to put some of the data. And data is always tricky. I know that. How to Lie with Maps is an old book that explains exactly how tricky data can be to show certain things. But I like very much that the 5 top cities, and in the case, for example, of Genève, here for gross density and net density was the counting was using only the central core of the city. Many Swiss cities, if you are familiarized with the Swiss, you might know that the cities has this compact, of course, core center, but after that, everything gets much more sprawl in low density. So, but what I like very much, and that's the reason why I put it the gross density and the net density, is because the gross is the city boundary in terms of administrative boundaries. So inhabitants by hectare, and I use hectare because an hectare in Barcelona, it's a block of the Eixample, so it's a very for us, it's very easy to understand what does it mean. And the gross density is the average counting all the surface of the urban area, and the net density is only counting the land allocated for residential space. And you can see, of course, the difference. But what I like the most is this figure here. Copenhagen has less than 2 people per household. And in fact, 50% of the households in Copenhagen is only 1 person. And the same happens to Geneva. Because there are many reasons for housing shortage. But let me give you some data from Barcelona that it's not the only explanation, but it's important to have that in mind. Because, and I will go to that later, my responsibility, my competences is on the physical space. Leandro was saying that livable is probably this concept where the physical city meets the citizens that live in that physical. Well, my competence, my responsibility is in how we define that physical space to make sure that that citizens can develop whatever their life wants to be. That's my responsibility. And I always say, I'm not solving people's life. I'm trying to give a better environment, a kind of scenography where people can develop its life. But I'm not literally changing people's life directly, because many times I'm a necessary condition, but not, of course, the only one. And it's important in my position to get that, because otherwise you can really freak out and really you can overpass your own competences. But I want to go back to this one because I had this conversation with the mayor when I arrived. Barcelona, in 1976, the city had 1.8 million inhabitants. That's the year that the General Master Plan, that the legal document for urban planning that still's on place, was approved. And we were 1.8. The city will raise up until 79, so 9 years later, we arrived to 1.9. And the General Master Plan, the predictions, the population growth predictions was the city will grow up to 2.3 million people. We never passed 1.9, never. After 79, during the 80s, and at the beginning of the 90s, the city lost 300,000 inhabitants. Then stopped in more or less 1.6, and last year, for the first time, we pass again and we are 1.7. What I have in my table is how can I make sure that I can fit in my city 2 million people? Because what's my challenge? My challenge basically is here. During the 70s, the household size in Barcelona was almost 4. So what basically means that even for less population, I need more housing units to house the same people. So, wow, we get a problem here. And of course, during these 60s and 70s, a lot of housing units were built in this city. Basically, 40% of the stock of housing units that the city has right now were built during that 20 years. But what happens now? All the old guys in the city, of course, you can imagine my previous chief architects, always the ones that were in charge of the Olympic Games and so on, they always tells you what you should do. And sometimes I raise the hand and I say like, yeah, but you know what happens? That the city of Barcelona, which is physically limited by the other neighbors, the hill and the sea, has 100 square kilometers. And during that years, the 60s and the 70s, most of the land was developed. What means basically that they have extensions, pieces of land that they can build fast and easier. Today, we still have space, and you will see what kind of space, but we are working literally with the leftovers in different places. The tools, the management to deal with these leftovers is much more complicated, slower, and costly than when you have extensions of land to develop. And this is not an excuse. What I'm saying is that in order to face certain discussions on how do we have to redefine our planning tools, we have to keep that in mind, that this is part of my issue. Because I have a lot of tools in my hands, but I cannot create new land. There is no way that I can create new land. I'm not God, I'm just the urban planner, okay? So I can put a roof and build space, but not land. So, and I think that this is very relevant because we are much more alike in this condition than in the other ones. So when we're talking about livability and rankings, we also have to understand what's our specific context, because I'm not working in Copenhagen. I don't have any competence there or responsibility. My responsibility is in this city. And this city has a specific conditions, and I have to respond to that ones. So we might share among us the challenges. We might share opportunities. But in the way we develop and go from that challenge to that opportunity is unique. And we have to understand the context, because otherwise I'm creating mistake expectations on what much I can become Copenhagen. No, I cannot become Copenhagen. That's impossible. I cannot become Claudia Schiffer. I'm not Claudia Schiffer. So I have to realize that I'm not that. I have to work with what I have. And that's it. And I can do well, quite well. So that's my context. This is the where I work. And it's already there. I don't have a blank page. When you arrive to that position, it's very important to understand the city is already there. It's built. It's not like, wow, I can start from scratch. No, that's my reality every morning. Everything is there. So I'm working, that's my work. And to be honest, I love it. Some data. We develop, you can already realize that I'm crazy about intensity and compactness. So we developed this analysis with a grid of 4 blocks by 4 blocks, and we can, so the cells can be compared among the city. And we developed this one on urban intensity, which is square meters, the same one as this gross density, the net density, square meters of residential space per hectare. And we allocated population. So the urban experience in this city for the majority of its citizens, because this is more or less 45% of the population lives in an area that it's between 20,000 square meters per hectare to 30,000. This more or less means 200 housing units to 300 housing units per hectare in each block, okay? And then what is also interesting is that this is allocated mostly, the more intense, the oldest, the fabric. Why? Because right now, my planning legislation is every time reducing intensity in my city. So every time that I regenerate a piece of the city, I'm losing intensity. Wow, this is something to think about it. So when I crossed that with other things like land use mixture, we need, and I would love economists to give me these figures and these numbers, we need to arrive to a certain level of critical mass to guarantee mixture. Otherwise, there is not enough people. And we need to put that in numbers. We need to have that figures. Also, we know that this is a city that, in general, of course, there is always room for improvement, that has access to public transportation, that also, of course, has to improve, and access to public facilities. My challenge, which is adapt to climate change to reduce conditions of inequalities, for example, by providing affordable housing, has to do with how do we intensify areas. And I said to the mayor from the beginning, and not only within the city borders, we need to bring that intensity to the metropolitan scale. And that's the challenge for most of the European cities, for example, to make this intensity bigger, because commuting is not the solution. Every time that I sit down in a table with the people from mobility, sometimes I raise my hand and I say, like, you know that the underground space is also limited, so that at a certain point it won't be possible to create a new tunnel or to enlarge that tunnel, because we keep on that mindset of more, more, more. And when it's underneath, it looks like the space is not finite, and it is. I have a certain amount of space. It's like yesterday, we were discussing a change in one of the main axes in the city. The space that I have between facade and facade is rigid, is what I get. So if I want to increase, I need to increase the pedestrian space, so someone has to lose part of the space that now is using. Well, something as simple as, as that becomes a real discussion today in many of our city councils tables. And this in the urban fabric, I will go deeper later, because this is the beginning of our new strategy for public spaces, that it's adding to the previous one, but it's based on the knowledge we learn by analyzing these things. So what are the goals of my agenda? Basically, there are only two, but they are quite challenging. One is the idea of redefining urban quality. This city in the late 70s, in the first democratic governments, decided that the people in charge of public space and planning policies decided that at that moment the materiality of the streets was the definition of the urban quality, and that was that in every pedestrian crossing point, there is this ramp that makes it accessible, and it was a street light and a paper bag, you say, una papelera? Basket. And that the materiality of any street in the city, in the richest neighborhood and in the lowest income neighborhood, will be the same. This is taken for granted in this city. And I have lived in New York, and I've visited many times Paris or London. And we know that we don't have to take it for granted. This is a political statement. But this was at that time. Today, probably, if we talk about urban quality, we will be talking about more space for pedestrians, more shadows, more comfort, more whatever. So redefining urban quality has not we cannot take it for granted. We have to discuss about it. Because in fact, what we are talking is that in that fixed space between the two facades, how do we redistribute that, the uses there, the flows? And also that urban quality, when we redefine that, we go to the second one. And that's the reason I put in top of that picture, because the built space of the city is already built. So I need to adapt not only the public space, but I need to adapt all these buildings as well, according to an idea of urban quality. And that's what we're working with. So what exactly, I'm not Superwoman, I don't have, so what are the tools that I have? I have basically 3 main tools. That's my areas of competence. I'm in charge of defining the public space policies of the city. And I have divided into 3 ideas. I'm not sure if I spell correctly category, but anyway. So public space, I work with 3 main ideas. Category, and you will see that later, means all that public spaces that has a clear label. Street, square, park, garden. These are clear labels. More or less, we all agree in what does it mean. Monumental is because I think that cities needs monumental spaces. We have every year an ordinary life or a monotonia, life, but we love certain days along the year to dress special, to do something special, a meal, whatsoever. The city is the same. We have this basic quality of public space all over the city, but there are certain places that you love to have something different. That's what I call the monumental. And the third one is the ordinary. And this is the program that we are developing right now. In fact, we are implementing already right now. The ordinary means public space that has no label, because in fact, it's a leftover from planning action. Urban planning always left kind of leftovers all over the city. There are in terms of zoning, there are public spaces, but since they are too tiny, scattered, forget it. Any city would take care of that, because for each one is such a much effort that doesn't make sense. In the program that I will show you, what we have done is we have summarized all of them. And the potential that they have is higher than any park of the city. They are scattered, but they are spaces in terms of zoning qualify as public spaces, but do not act as such, okay? Also, I have on my table heritage. Wow, that's a nightmare. That's complicated because the city is already there, and you have to find the balance between about the balance between keeping and maintaining, and this idea of conservation and preservation, that the word always is difficult, preservation with the capacity of at the same time reuse them. So there is always it's not an easy conversation. Many people won't like you. You have to take that for granted, but you need to put that in order because, and we are working now to improve the regulation to make it more clear, and from my perspective to help the whole idea of heritage to make it co-responsible. The administration has to deliver resources and subsidies for the privates to keep that heritage, but at the same time, we need ourselves, the city council owns a lot of buildings that are part of the heritage, and we don't have a restoration or a maintenance plan. We are defining that, and that's a lot of money. And if you ask the privates to do that, you better show with your own example that you are taking care of that. And transformations, here is the place where I link my work with the manager of urban planning, because here is where we work about the big transformations. And the big transformations right now, as you have seen, it's about reusing, intensifying, exchanging things, because the idea of taking industrial land, erase it, and transform into mixed development in this city is over. We don't have more land. The last industrial land we needed. I work analyzing and doing research on industrial land for more than 15 years. Probably I have written a lot of that. And I come up with the image of what an industrial land represents for a city, which is the kitchen, the restroom, the laundry room, and the storage that we all have at home, different sizes, but we all have that spaces at home. That's what industrial spaces means for any city. The kitchen, the laundry room, and the storage, we have learned how to mix with the rest of the house. So now we have open kitchens in living rooms. The laundry room in my house is just a cabinet at the entry room. You don't even realize that the laundry machine is there. Storage, IKEA has shown us that how you can storage all over your house. But there's one thing, the restroom, the old one. We do the same thing, we made the same things in that space for always. Technology and design allows us to bring it inside the houses, but it will be always separated, segregated. That's the same with the industrial lands. We need certain industrial lands that works as restrooms, and we need them in cities. So that game in Barcelona, it's over. So the new game calls that way, and we need to adapt our planning tools, and we need to be smarter how we exchange pieces, creating new opportunities. How if I move that thing over there, I create here a void that I can use to create another opportunity in that place, and where these things goes, because I have suddenly an empty building because the use that was there is gone, I have another opportunity. It's much more about acupuncture. So my guess is that in the future, this city will be much more dedicated to management, planning, urban management, that planning in the traditional way, that super big plans. So this is the agenda. Of course, that agenda, this position is appointed by the mayor, so it depends, the long you last depends on the mayor. If he lasts more than one term, our political terms is 4 years. So if he lasts, in this case, more than 4 years, I probably will last more than 4 years in this position. Otherwise, who knows in 2 years? We are now in the midterm. So I have to keep that in mind as well, that this is just a temporary work. So that I have to work in the short term, because of course, any mayor asks you, like, I want results in the 4-year terms because I want to be re-elected. So I need to work with short terms, midterms. This is two terms, what means that the first 2 years you have to put the projects into the machine, the ones that you want to implement. The second 2 years, you are working in these projects because these ones will be the next ones that will start in the next term, either you or who comes. And the long term is because, of course, you always need to work with the operations at the short term, but with a vision and strategy in the long term. So you have to manage these two things. So now that you know more or less what a chief architect in this city does, let me, and will be the last part, I don't know the timing. 5 minutes? Okay, wow, 10 minutes. 10 minutes, Leandro, be generous. This is the public space program. Of course, you will be visiting the super blocks and the green axis. When I arrived here, can you imagine, everybody thought that the new government, the new mayor, we will erase. I wouldn't say that. So I come up and I say, look, any person in my position has understood, and it should be that way, that the development of a city is a process, and you are part of that. It's a chain. You are part of that during a certain period of time. You get things started, you have a heritage, you add, and you leave. And I know that because I used to be assistant to the chief architect at the beginning of 2000 when I was clearly younger. And I'm now opening things that I saw starting at that point. So I know perfectly what means this process. So this program is not against anything. It's adding another layer. This project is not about the places, the urban public spaces with category. It doesn't work on streets, or it doesn't work on squares. And you will see why. And that's the reason why we call proximity and interior spaces. In Spanish and Catalan, the acronymous is much more funny because it's PEPI. PEPI is an ordinary name. And it's very nice because this is about ordinary spaces and how we beautify them. And I love that the acronym was PEPI. And within all the 10 boroughs in the city, one of the sentences that you get any PEPI from Maria, or you don't have a PEPI in your neighborhood. So La PEPI is this program. And this program is about understanding that a city is defined by its streets, walkability, equity, safety, productivity, by this public space. And it has to do with quantity and quality. Quantity comes many times from standards. That leftovers that I'm working with comes from that standards in previous planning processes. But quality is about structure, form, materiality, and size. You all know this picture. The same density allocated in different ways, the result and the experience is totally different. Also, structure comes to understand that public space, many times, people think only in one dimension. We are talking here at 3 dimensions. And also how private space impacts on the quality of the public spaces. So I go back to the analysis of the urban fabric. What we did here was to analyze, we discount the harbor and the waterfront, and we discount the hill. But the rest of the fabric, including parks, because the parks are in urban land and they are part of the zoning, we analyze empty and build. Very simple. Empty meaning that there is no structure built on top. It doesn't mean that that doesn't have things on it, okay? But it's not built. And oh, surprise, the city looks very gray, but in fact, only 1/4 of the urban fabric is occupied by buildings higher than 1 floor. So basically what means housing, office spaces, commercial, blah, blah, blah. 42%, it's allocated to the labeled public spaces, streets, parks, gardens, and squares. But what I love, and we discover, are these ones, 24% of empty space. Don't look at these figures. I'm not crazy. Wow, we have 1,000 hectares. Wait, sir, relax. This is not empty. But this is a place of opportunity, and we work on that one. We analyze a little bit more on that. And we come up that if we look, as we look on the streets, in this idea of the 3 dimensions, we can come up, and this is the type of spaces, we can come up that the city has 100 hectares of qualified green land pending of development. For a city like Barcelona, this is a treasury. And of course, this is not public owned. And we have started from the ones that mostly are public owned. Why? Well, because you always start by the easiest part, and then when you learn, you move to the most complicated one. ones, okay? This is La Pepi 2.0 will be the next ones. We are already working on that, but the first ones are already into the machine. You can see most of the places are kind of leftovers, and you will see later with the examples. But also what we did here is to add, I show this picture to the mayor. We are used to this kind of concentrated public space. This is about a different strategy. We can, and in fact, in these 4 years, we will almost arrive to 20 hectares. In 4 years, we will urbanize 20 hectares of new public space that it's not working as such, but in these shapes. From very small ones that more or less are less between 1,500 to 2,000 square meters to big ones that are more than 2 hectares. But all of them are useful. And if I look at them like that, wow, maybe we will make space and energy for these ones, but not for the small ones, okay? So the strategy was to count all of them together. And by doing it, what we did was to join different programs, understanding this 3D section. One is to improve and repair certain spaces, land acquisition, so these 22 hectares, most of them, 20 or 18, are public owned. Others, we are working with the private sector. We need to, most of that spaces today are paved. We are taking the pavement out. Of course, we are adding shade, not only to that space, but also in other spaces in the city. And the blind walls, many times that spaces are the result of planning exercises. So some plot was expecting to be built, never will be built. So suddenly I have a blind wall that can transform into a new facade. So we are adding all these programs, and this is what we're working with now. And you can see here, these are different graphics to explain that. This is a program that in 4 years will deliver, will implement. Now the numbers, we are not in 350, we are almost in 300. There are shadows in garden, in playgrounds and things like that. The green spaces are, most of them all in the machine, and you will see now different examples. This is the typical example of the 6 in our zoning means public space. In this case, there is already one. We are acquiring this piece to enlarge it, and we are renovating. This is part of the now we have only the projects. This is another example. This, for example, you can see here, the planning says this is a 6, and here there's a building. We are turning down this building, and we are now finishing the participatory programs, and you can see here the projects. And this goes one and another, and another, and another. I go fast, promise. But you can see there are different examples. The blind walls. Next year we have the world capital. Barcelona will be the architecture world capital, and we launch a competition on blind walls as a legacy instead of making pavilions, because I said no more things on the street, please. And we are now developing these all these blind walls, the roofs, the shades. With the shades programs, the first option always is trees, so that we are adding green. Trees in this city are much more relevant than the green on the ground. If we cannot to plant trees because the underground is quite full, we look for fixed structures with energy production. Or the last one, the seasonal systems are these kind of tendals, you might say? No, los tendales, ¿cómo se llaman? Los shelters, exactly. And we are putting them, you can see different examples. And just to remind this idea of the medium, short, long term. So Basically, we work in what we call the scheduled interventions that has to end up in the next 2 years. Then you start working on the project's definition for the next terms, and at the same time here. At this point, there are a lot of regulations and tools and planning tools because these need longer vision, but you need to, all of them needs to be thought in advance because you need to understand where, in what direction you want to bring the city transformation. This more or less a map of the city that shows the places we're working with or working on. And thank you very much for your attention.